Thank you very much for the introduction. This presentation will look at the European policies and legislation impacting food labeling and biodiesel. So the two palm oil, the two applications of palm oil, and will frame the European legislative actions and as well the actions by private operators. So we have an introduction. We will look at the European policies impact food labeling. We will take a look at the policies on biofuels and their implications on palm oil-based biofuels, biodiesel, and conclusions. Now, in the EU and in some European non-EU states, we are witnessing growing complexity of regulatory and market conditions that concern both the food and the biofuel application of palm oil. These requirements are actually at a two-tier level. We have a public regulatory framework, public intervention through new legislative frameworks affecting food, but mostly the biofuel. And we have actions by private operators in the two fields. These requirements result, in fact, in instances of de facto, if not de jure, restrictions and trade discrimination vis-à-vis product based on or containing palm oil. As I said, we would see for both the food and the biodiesel application of palm oil, we have two levels of action, public and private. If we look at the food sector now of the framework, we have a public regulation and okay, can everybody hear me? Or yeah, okay. So with the in the food, so we are witnessing at a public level and private level action. So the public level regulation, we have well, the most important regulatory change is going to take place in 2014 with the food information regulation, and we have seen also initiatives at the member state level, including fat taxes and restriction. The most recent one are restrictions put in place. Well, that there is a draft legislation in Belgium and in Hungary on trans fats, and propose a restriction in palm oil content in Belgium specifically. At the private level, we have action and requirements. In particular, we're witnessing, and especially in France, an illegal and deceptive palm oil-free campaigns which are being carried out by private market operators such as retailers, alone or in suspicious synchrony with other market forces. Now, we all are aware of the actions that are being undertaken here in France by certain retailers and producers, which have their own agenda that is placing their products selling their products to consumers. And they are, in fact, acting so alone for their own agenda, but also in synchrony with other market operators. For example, environmental NGOs, which are which have their own agenda, which are basically drawing the picture of palm oil as being environmental unsustainable. Competing EU producers of competing oils. So all these forces are acting basically in synchrony, and they are in fact, especially in France, but this is also spreading in other parts of Europe. They are putting in place these conducts, which are in fact deceptive and illegal. So to go back to so this was the introduction, and to go back to the public level framework. Now, as I said, the most important change at the EU level that will concern palm oil is the changes that will be brought by the Food Information Regulation that will make the indication of the vegetable origin of oil mandatory. The labeling of palm oil as such is currently not mandatory under the current EU framework, but under the Food Information Regulation, which will in this part come into effect on the 13th December 2014, the specific vegetable origin will have to be indicated. So of course that is where the actions by the private operators come into place, because this is a change in the legislation that has been planned and is going to take place in 2014. But before this regulatory change enters into force, of course, the private actors have already put forward a campaign discriminating and basically deliberating, picturing palm oil as evil. And of course, by the entry into force of the regulation of the indication of mandatory labeling, the consumer will already have been, brainwashed on the nature of alleged nature of palm oil. And of course, it will be very easy once this regulation comes into force for the consumer to single out the palm oil content in products and basically to exclude it. So, by making it compulsory for the oil oil origin to be specified, a mere look at the list of ingredients will tell the consumers whether a product contains palm or not. But of course, that is where the actions by private operators are deliberately also deliberately wedging themselves into, because of course with this regulatory change ahead in mind in these 2 years, they are acting against palm oil. They are acting to these illegal campaigns, making it easier once the regulation on information enters into force for the consumer to single out products. Similar legislations will also take place. Similar changes will be brought in Switzerland. Switzerland is aligning its food labeling rules to the EU framework. So already on 1st of November 2013, the Swiss labeling rules will require the mandatory indication of the vegetable origin of oil. So in Switzerland, it will no longer be possible for vegetable oils like palm oil to be labeled under the category name vegetable oil as it is in the EU. Other regulatory, public regulatory interventions that have an effect on palm oil are the fat taxes, so-called fat taxes, and restrictions on trans fat that have been taking place and adopted, and then in some cases also repealed in a number of EU member states. We know that this phenomenon has been already going on since 2005, with Denmark being, I think, the precursor EU member state adopting these type of taxes. Denmark also adopted a specific fat tax in 2011, then repealed it 1 year after. In general terms, the EU member states legislation that pose an additional, require the payment of an additional excise duty on certain foods are accessible under the rules of the EU and to some extent also WTO. But of course, in some instances, it can be argued whether they de facto result in a protection of a local product vis-à-vis products that are not locally produced. However, in 2003, Belgium has proposed a similar restriction. The restriction is considering in early 2013, in March 2013, there was a proposal tabled in the Parliament on restrictions on trans fats, which are similar to those that have been adopted by a number of member states, but there is an element of novelty. The draft Belgium law actually was limiting trans fats, but it also incorporates a limitation on the content of palm oil and coconut oil in foodstuff. Now, when of course we are talking about a fat tax which is non-discriminatory, at least on the face, an assessment can be made. But when a product is actually specifically singled out by a legislation, like it's in the case of the Belgium draft, of course it gets a little bit more suspicious that there is a deliberate intent to hit one product specifically. The Belgium draft is actually very interesting because it proposes to basically ban the imports of the imports and the use of products containing a certain amount of trans fat on per 2 grams of trans fat per 100 grams of fat. By the way, also palm oil and coconut oil, because often they are used to replace trans fats. But I mean, this is basically in one piece of legislation that is intended to eliminate trans fats or to reduce them from the consumption. They are at the same time there is actually a focus on palm oil, which is not based on the same health reasons. And of course, there is any measure that is targeted to a specific component of foodstuff has to be based on science. I mean, especially because palm oil is a product which is used as substitute for these kind of substances, and it has no trans fat. So in one way, the legislation is actually defeating its own purpose, and it's certainly not based on any scientific assessment. Now we go to the private level of action when it comes to the picture of the EU European what's happening in the era of food labeling. So the damaging palm oil free labeling campaigns, which have been put in place already since a couple of years by retailers and producers, started in France, and now they are worryingly spreading in the French-speaking part of Belgium and in other parts of the EU. We are all aware of what's going on. The palm oil industry is in fact facing an attack. Palm oil free labeling campaigns, primarily in France, but also now in Belgium. A string of campaigns is being orchestrated, in fact, and directed by certain French retaliators against palm oil in the food sector. And these actions are, of course, pushing several food manufacturers to label their product as palm oil free, although even such information is not required by law, and in fact is against, as we will see, EU law. Then, of course, as I was hinting before when I was talking about the food information regulation, it is actually of no surprise that these campaigns are actually being put forward in a context of a change of regulatory framework that will require, for other reasons, for legitimate reasons, that the palm oil or vegetable origin of oils be indicated. As I said before, these campaigns have just enough time to install in the consumer the idea that palm oil is unhealthy, that is environmentally friendly, and when the food information regulation will come into force, of course, they will already be, consumers will already have witnessed of 2 years of campaigns, and they will easily be able to single out the products containing palm oil. Now, this is just a representation of these kind of labels, sans huile de palme, and put in a range of different products. And in many cases, they are actually coupled with an explanation of environmental and nutritional claims. In some products, there is an explanation behind the package that the particular product is produced with another type of oil, and it has a better impact on the environment, or it has a better nutritional. It's better on the nutritional point of view, etc., etc. Obviously, there is no scientific. Here the French retailer Casino has put forward a campaign on its website. There's a lot of information information and indication on the website of the alleged effects of palm oil, and it's also praises itself of having 350 products sans huile de palme. So why are these campaigns in fact illegal? Now, there are a number of EU regulations and also the French legislation but the principle, the main, one of the main arguments is that we are in presence of a nutrition claim within the meaning of Regulation 1924/2006. There is it's a claim because it's a statement, it's a voluntary statement, and it has it's a nutrition claim because it does not state, but it implies and suggests a particular nutritional property, which is a better sang huile de palme, which implies a healthier condition of the specific product. So it's because it's not among the claims listed in the annex to regulation, the permitted nutritional claims listed in the annex to regulation 1924. This is in fact a non-permitted nutritional claim under EU rules. It's plain and simple. It's a not permitted health claim, and this is in those cases in which the with the palm label is coupled with an explanation of the health properties of other oils vis-a-vis palm oil, then you also have an element of a prohibited health claim. Also, many of these labels are false and misleading claims. Misleading because they mislead the consumer as to the actual properties of the product, and they are misleading in some cases when some of them have a statement that are linked to the preservation of forests, and they are misleading because they are not backed they're not based on any scientific evidence. They're not based on any information, and they are basically claiming things without any scientific and any justification of the claim. Then, of course, I mean, there is a further level of violation, which is that of EU and EU member states laws on labeling and deceptive advertisement, which are also violated in a number of instances. What are the tools and remedies that are left to the industry? We have three courses of action: judicial proceedings before national courts, and this is what MPOC is actually doing. In 2013, MPOC has filed an action against the casino before the Tribunal de Commerce, and the case is still pending. Administrative actions before the Department on Competition, Consumer and Fight Against Fraud. This is an administrative complaint that has been launched against 5 producers and retailers whose products bear the palm oil-free labels and logos. And this case is also these procedures are also pending. But I mean, of course, there was no other recourse left than to try to redress the situation by taking action before courts and before the enforcement authorities. Obviously, another avenue which should also be pursued, not only by the MPOC but by all the affected industry, is of course that of a diplomatic and trade avenue, continuously engage with national authorities in the EU, and this is of course taking place, and also using all the commercial fora to table the issue of palm oil as not just as a labeling matter between private actors in the market, but as a real trade issue in all relevant fora. Now, we are aware that Malaysia and the EU are conducting free trade agreement negotiations, and this is obviously a venue in which the issues should be discussed, it should be put forward, and a solution should be found to these practices. Now we turn into the European framework on biofuels and implication on palm oil-based biodiesel. Now here we are witnessing a very strong intervention of the public regulator, which is in this case the EU, intervention which is actually based on environmental grounds, on allegedly unsustainability of certain biodiesel products, and we will see also the new developments in that sector with the ILUC proposal. And we also have private level action, which is an example of which is trade defense procedures that are being initiated and conducted at the request of EU producers of biodiesel. Now, the EU in the EU the EU is one of the biggest producers of biofuel products as well, based on rapeseed. So of course there are also very strong interests in the EU on the biofuel front. The public level regulations and requirements I have mentioned generally, but the main instruments are the Fuel Quality Directive and the Renewable Energy Directive, and also the ILUC proposal, as I was mentioning before, and the sustainability requirements that are included in the EU Fuel Quality Directive and the Renewable Energy Directive. Now, these two directives are basically they provide for the Fuel Quality Directive relates to the specific pollutants and specification included in fuel products, and it also requires, pursuant to an amendment that took place in 2009, it also sets a mandatory target for member states, for food suppliers in member states, to basically to reduce by 6% the greenhouse gas emissions that are caused by fuel and transportation. So it places this target to food suppliers in EU member states. The Renewable Energy Directive has been adopted within the framework of the so-called 2020 objectives of the EU, and inter alia, it requires a reduction of the 10% of greenhouse gas emissions in the transport sector. So both regulations put stringent requirements on EU member states to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions in the transport sector, by which means, obviously, by resorting to renewable energy sources, of which biodiesel is the most common example, and especially when we're talking about transportation fuels. Both regulations contain the so-called sustainability requirements, which are two parameters that have been conceived to ensure that the push for greener fuels and renewable energies does not actually have counterproductive effects and leads to counterproductive effects for the environment, which is what, in fact, the regulations are aiming to protect. The sustainability requirements are based on two drivers. The first one is the emission saving reduction threshold, which must be of at least 35% with respect to the greenhouse gas emissions that would have resulted from the use of fossil fuels. And this threshold, which was already quite tight, it's going to be even it's going to actually increase to 50% for existing installation and 60% for new installation as of 2017. The other sustainability criteria relates to the land used for the production of biofuels. It's a quite complex criteria that requires basically that the land used to produce biofuels must have a certain characteristic. Namely, it does not have a high biodiversity value or high carbon stock. So already these two requirements, which of course, I mean, on the face of them are non-discriminatory, but de facto they are questionable when it comes especially to the way they have been conceived, and certainly when it comes to their effects. Both the Fuel Quality Directive and the Renewable Energy Directive contain these requirements. In the EU, sustainable biofuels, and by sustainable I mean the biofuels that complies with the sustainability requirements, are counted for assessing compliance with the targets and thresholds set forth by the Fuel Quality Directive and the Renewable Energy Directive, and are eligible for financial support under the Renewable Energy Directive. Whereas unsustainable biofuels can still be marketed with the EU. There is no import prohibition, but they cannot be taken into account for the computing of compliance with the sustainability requirements, for the compliance with the targets and thresholds posed by the two directives, and are not eligible for financial support. So of course there is no incentive in the EU to buy and for EU purchasers to buy biofuel that is not sustainable. Now, what is interesting is actually the way the compliance mechanism that are available. Now, with respect especially to the first sustainability requirement, one of the ways of calculating compliance is by resorting to the so-called default values. So default values have been attributed for each biofuel, and when the default value is higher than the greenhouse gas saving emission threshold, 35%, is of course very easy for suppliers to prove that their biofuel meets the sustainability criteria. But when this is not the case, like in palm oil biodiesel obtained with a process not specified, of course there are more burdensome requirements for operators which have to prove a shipment by shipment or through certification. But the certification has to be accepted by the EU, of course, so it has to be recognized and accepted, to prove that their products do comply with the sustainability requirements. So it is an additional burden when the default value attributed by the regulation to all different biofuels is lower than the than the greenhouse gas emission threshold. Now, you may know that there is a case ongoing at WTO with Argentina complaining against this aspect of the Renewable Energy Directive. Argentina's soya biodiesel does not comply also with the requirements by default. So the default value that was attributed to Argentina's soybean-based biodiesel is lower. Argentina's exporting producers have not still obtained the certification by the EU, and the request is pending. So Argentina's exporters are disadvantaged vis-à-vis other producers, which by having to show on a shipment-by-shipment basis that their products actually comply with the sustainability requirement. And as a result, they are obviously losing market share for their biodiesel in the EU. And they were #1 suppliers in Spain for biodiesel. Further to this already worrying framework, there is which is being proposed through the ILUC proposal. This proposal actually does not meet the favor neither of exporters to the EU or of local producers, because it is in fact a new proposal which is actually being debated. The Parliament has just voted on it a couple of weeks ago. It's a proposal which aims at reducing further. Well, it's a proposal that is aimed at addressing the so-called emissions that are originated by indirect land use change, which are those emissions that are basically caused by the change of destination of land from other cultures or other destination to palm oil for the production of biofuel for the production of biofuels. So the Commission has the EU framework already in the Renewable Energy Directive. There was a commitment to consider such emissions. This year, actually in 2012, the Commission came forward with a proposal on how to address ILUC emissions. In practical terms, this proposal operates a further distinction of biofuels. So we have the unsustainable biofuels and sustainable biofuels. Now within the sustainable, because the unsustainable obviously already out of the market, but within the sustainable biofuels, we have now a further classification of first generation biofuels, which are those based on food crops, and advanced biofuels, which are basically those biofuels which are produced from feedstock and material that do not require a land use change and are basically not require a change in land use. So what is the classification, or what is the difference? Basically, according to the draft proposal, which has already been accepted by the Parliament, the first generation biofuels would actually their contribution to the 10% threshold that is required by the Renewable Energy Directive is capped to 6%. The Commission proposed the 5%, the Parliament raised that to 6%, which means that there is a 4% market share that has to be mandatorily destined for advanced biofuels. Also, after 2020, these old generation biofuels will not benefit from financial support, and the first generation biofuels have been, in fact, under this proposal, attributed the so-called ILUC emission factors, which now, should this proposal actually turn into a regulation, will only be relevant for reporting purposes. But of course, the future is that these ILUC emission factors will be counted and will be computed together with the actual green life cycle of the biofuel as such, and basically they will be counted against the 35% which are greenhouse gas saving threshold, and they will be counted for the overall compliance with the 10% and 6% targets. In fact, the first draft of the Commission proposal, which was never tabled, was in fact included already since, in its very first entry into force, that the ILUC emissions factor be computed together already now, basically with the life cycle of biofuels. Against the targets set by the EU. So the Commission wanted to accelerate the process and have already ILUC emissions be computed now. This will not take place now. Now the ILUC emission factors are only there for monitoring purposes. But as of 2020, they will definitely be part of the calculation for the overall compliance with the Renewable Energy Directive targets. If we look at the ILUC emission factors that have been attributed to first-generation biofuels, even there, not surprisingly, you see that there is a very much higher emission ILUC factor that is being attributed to oil, to basically biodiesel based on oil crops, 55 grams per CO2 energy, basically, it's the formula. Whereas if you compare that with the ILUC emission factor that has been attributed to sugar-based crops and cereal crops, which is of 13 and 12 for sugar-based and 13 for cereal crops, then of course there's a big difference, 55 and 12, 13 already. All the biodiesel, which is produced, sourced from oil crops, will have this much higher ILUC factor. So we have, according to this framework, which may enter into force, a discrimination between first generation and second generation biofuel. But within the first generation, you also have the different categories. You have biofuels based on sugar crops and cereal crops, and biofuels based on oil crops, which have higher emission ILUC factors. When it comes to the private level action in the EU, as I said, here the conduct by private operators is mainly effected through the launch and initiations of trade defense proceedings before the European Commission. We have now a number of anti-dumping and countervailing duties in place against biofuel products, following investigations that were initiated on the basis of complaints submitted by EU associations. We have now in force anti-dumping and countervailing measures against imports of biodiesel and bioethanol from the US. We have anti-dumping countervailing duties against, we have anti-dumping duties against, provisional ones against biodiesel from Argentina and Indonesia, which were actually very recently imposed. We are still in the middle of the investigation, and we are awaiting. In the next month, the proceeding will terminate with the definitive measures. Again, what are the tools and remedies against this framework, this biofuel and side of the EU framework? diplomatic and trade avenues, the WTO avenue, we're talking about measures that are imposed by governments. So WTO avenue is more straightforward. WTO is concerned with the measures imposed by member states and not by private actors. So WTO avenue means not only, of course, dispute settlement, but also engagement at the WTO to turn this regulatory issue into a trade concern and ultimately to constitute the basis for a dispute. This avenue has been pursued, as we know, to a different extent by Argentina, the US and Indonesia. Argentina, the US and Indonesia have questioned more than once the Renewable Energy Directive at the TBT committee. Argentina has now acted. Argentina has actually acted twice. Once against a Spanish measure which was basically prohibiting imports of biodiesel altogether. This measure was taken by Spain in retaliation of the Repsol takeover by Argentina, but still it was a measure implementing the renewable energy framework. It was terminated by Spain, but it gives an idea on how actually this framework gives the possibility of members then to stop altogether and to halt the imports of biodiesel. No, that case is dormant, but I mean Argentina brought another case, which is the one I was talking now before, specifically against the EU sustainability criteria, especially the sustainability criteria number 1. And the US and Indonesia have also questioned at the TBT the implementation mechanism of the Renewable Energy Directive, questioning the fact that the US specifically claimed that the EU would not respect the standards that the US was applying and also, I mean, the overall actual compliance with these with the requirements. Now, the EU-Malaysia FTA, as I said before, in the case of the labeling, food labeling component of the presentation, again, the EU-Malaysia FTA would provide a forum for discussing the regulatory framework on the biofuel application of palm oil. But also, of course, EU-Indonesia and EU-ASEAN, and I mean all the frameworks in which this issue can actually be tabled. Of course, the other important element of a strategy is a proactive engagement to establish international standards in the area of biofuels and sustainability certification, and proactive engagement when it comes to the trade defense measures that are being imposed in the EU. Proactive engagement, and this is the private sector should be particularly interested in and proactive in engaging with the EU authorities before the European Commission proceeding. As an overall conclusion, so we have seen, I hope that it was clear throughout the presentation, that there are a number of regulatory and commercial threats to palm oil, which concern its both its food and biofuel applications. With respect to the food application, the illegal and deceptive palm oil-free campaigns are being perpetrated in suspicious synchrony with regulatory changes taking place in the EU, i.e. the Food Information Regulation, which will require the indication of the vegetable origin of oil. With respect to the biofuel application, we have blanket regulation and legislation in the making, the ILUC proposal, which has been drafted, which is based on environmental objective. Again, I mean, this new legislative initiative are worrying developments and actually are in synchrony with the proliferation of private actions, i.e. the anti-dumping and countervailing duties complaints, which are progressively, if not shutting palm oil-based biodiesel out of the market, but certainly reducing its market share. I'm finishing. It's important to stress that the concerning allegations that are being brought by private parties through the deceptive and illegal campaigns are based on unsubstantiated claims and manipulated facts, not based on science and based on any evidence. But the lack of intervention of the EU authorities and EU member states authorities in order to sanction these instances that are taking place in the food area, these illegal conducts, are even more troubling, in fact, if seen in connection with the similarly unsubstantiated and discretionary EU and EU member states policy in the area of biofuels. This is important that the palm oil industry take action swiftly and in a concerted manner. And by palm oil industry, I don't refer not only to the NPOC, but the palm oil industry is the industry at large, is the exporting producers, it's the exporting countries from all over the world. The palm oil is produced in South America, is produced in Africa, there are the processors, there's the food industry that uses, there is the biofuel industry, there's refineries, all the industry must come together and fight these instances of discrimination and counter the effects of the legal content and deceptive practices, as well as the discretionary regulatory framework that is being put in place, especially when it comes to the biofuel, with respect to the biofuel application. Market access can only be preserved if a comprehensive, effective, and well-defined strategy is adopted and implemented by the palm oil industry, which is in fact being attacked on the different fronts at different levels in the EU. There is no silver bullet. The EU is a very lucrative market, but it's also a very highly regulated and sophisticated market, which requires investment and engagement by all the industry. I have concluded, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Madam Laurenza. Now, if anyone has any question, I'm sure Mrs. Laurenza would be pleased to answer them.
Si je me souviens bien,
If I'm not mistaken, the small-sized producers in the Ivory Coast won against System U, a supermarket, for having talked disparagingly of palm oil.
That has been brought by Côte d'Ivoire. Can you actually is this okay? May I ask you to repeat the question in
yeah. If I remember well, the small orders of palm oil producer from Ivory Coast won against System U.
Yeah. No, indeed, I am aware that there is a case that has been brought by the Côte d'Ivoire producers against System U. Yeah.
Thank you. You referred to the limit to the use of palm oil in food that was proposed by the two Belgian senators, Sabine Bethune and Cindy Frassen. So you know that the proposal was, well, they decided to withdraw because the stakeholders met with them. But they said that depending on the Superior Health Council report, they might reinstate that bill. So is there any such intention? Because, you know, the Superior Health Council report came out in August. And if, is there any legal action that we should take if they do such if they bring back that bill? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Well, indeed, this is if the Belgium legislator goes on with this for this avenue, there are all sorts of remedies that have to be put in place. That is, of course, before the proposed legislation come into place. As I said, there is a clear element of discrimination, and there is no science. Well, I have the proposal, of course, for the elements that are available now, there is absolute no scientific base for any such measure. We have had the example of the Nutella tax, so-called Nutella tax in France, which also was targeted to palm oil and palm oil containing products, and the profiles of inconsistency with WTO, for example, are quite clear. In that case, of course, the remedies that have to be put in place are those of engaging with the authorities and eventually also with the EU to ensure that this legislation does not pass. This is quite straightforward, and every action must be taken to prevent this such a law to pass.
Si vous avez des autres questions, if you have...
Is it on? Thank you for a very comprehensive presentation. It was very interesting, I thought. My name is Arividya. I'm from the Mission of Malaysia to the EU in Brussels. More importantly, I lead the services negotiations for the Malaysia-EU FTA. So rest assured that these issues are on the table. Certainly, I'm not at liberty to share details, but this is a matter of concern to Malaysia, so these issues are on the negotiating table. I have a comment followed by some questions. The first one is with regards to the reference to trans fat tax that you mentioned in your presentation. Now, my understanding is that duties, taxes, tariffs, these are the competence of the community. So I'm not sure what would be the legal basis for a member state to introduce such taxes. So if you could clarify on that, that would be helpful. Secondly, I also noticed that you made references to unsustainability and the link to market access. Now, just for me to be clear and to ensure that my understanding is accurate, unsustainability does not lead to restricted market access. Market access is not affected. What is affected would be the financial support attached to certain industries. Now, countries have that flexibility or liberty to attach financial support to some industries, but not to others. So I'm not sure how, by not lending financial support because of unsustainability concerns, how does that become something that's not WTO compliant? So if you could shed some light on that, that would be helpful. And lastly, on trade defense, I'm not sure what is meant when you say it is a private action. After all, the way trade defense works is a process. So although the complaint comes from the private sector, it's the government that chooses whether to act or not. And I think it's quite clear-cut through the WTO anti-dumping legal text that you have certain de minimis levels which you have to look at before an anti-dumping investigation is initiated. So if you could perhaps clarify, it would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. I will start from the last one. The reason why the anti-dumping actions being brought by on the basis of complaints submitted by EU domestic producer has been labeled in my presentation as private action is because these proceedings start on the basis of a complaint submitted by market operators, so by the EU domestic industry. It was the reference to private action in connection with the anti-dumping and countervailing duties investigation was made to convey the message that the EU producers are reacting to competition in the EU, and they are doing so by submitting complaints alleging dumping and subsidies practices because palm oil biodiesel is more competitive, for all sorts of reasons in the EU market. So yes, of course, the measures are taken by the EU institutions, by the Commission, the provisional measures, and by the Council, the definitive measures. So they are within the framework of, ultimately, we're talking about measures put in place by regulators, so they result in measures, public measures. But the message I wanted to convey is that in the framework of the biodiesel regulation the biofuel regulation of palm oil in the EU, how are the privates behaving? The privates are behaving by submitting anti-dumping complaints and requesting for anti-dumping duties, and so putting in motion a process which, of course, is then in the hands of authorities and of exporters that are and also of domestic producers that have triggered the complaint, because, as you know, as you have rightly stated, the trade defense investigations are a process that involved authorities and private operators. Now, when it comes to the WTO assessment of the compatibility of the sustainability requirements, as I said, the sustainability requirements do not, in fact, impede de jure market access on sustainable so-called biofuels can still be marketed in the EU, they can be traded, they can be imported, etc. But they are posed at a disadvantage They are posed at a disadvantage because they are not eligible for support, and they are not relevant for compliance with the targets set by the Full Quota Directive and the Renewable Energy Directive. And in that respect, there is a clear disadvantage and there is a clear discrimination which is relevant on the Article 3, to name one of the GATT, Article 3, Paragraph 4. There is a clear disadvantage of unsustainable biodiesel and biofuels vis-à-vis sustainable ones. And I mean, especially the second sustainability, the first sustainability criteria is the greenhouse gas saving. And when you have a default value attributed by the Commission, of course, life is easier for some biofuels than for others. The second one is based on land, so it's even a geographical criteria, which by its very nature discriminates countries that produce palm oil on peats, for example, or on land with high diversity. I mean, these countries have a choice whether not to export palm oil or to basically have to prove that have to get their palm oil certified, etc., etc. So it is clear that they pose the operators at a disadvantage. In that respect, there is an element of WTO concern, in my opinion, which we'll have to see if it's justified or not by environmental consideration and Article 20. When it comes to the first question,
Madam Laurenza, excuse me,
yeah.
I think we have to really proceed to the next speaker. I'm so sorry.
Well, that's really okay.